Dan jadi sekarang kita sampai pada sesi sore ini tentang skeptisisme hijau, dan ini hanya memberikan konteks keseluruhan dari sesi yang ada dalam 2 bagian. Mari kita kembali 6 tahun ke Stockholm ketika Hans Rosling berbicara tentang kesalahpahaman tentang dunia, dan dia menunjukkan di luar dunia jauh lebih baik daripada yang dipikirkan kebanyakan orang. Tapi jelas, plus dalam banyak hal juga harus dibayar dengan pengorbanan. Kami telah meningkatkan harapan hidup untuk mengurangi kemiskinan absolut dan banyak hal seperti itu. Tetapi tidak ada B yang nol. Seperti dalam pengobatan kita tidak memiliki efek tanpa efek samping. Dan efeknya mungkin juga menghindar. Jika Anda melihat pada kemiskinan absolut misalnya, di mana Hans Rosling berpikir bahwa kita akan berada di jalur yang tepat untuk memberantas kemiskinan absolut pada tahun 2030. Beberapa tahun terakhir telah melihat ke arah mundur, dengan bukannya hanya 800 itu akan meningkat menjadi 900 juta. Jadi itu juga dalam mencapai hal yang perlu kita miliki. Dan sangat sulit untuk menyampaikan kepada publik apa bedanya efek, apa yang plus, dan apa kelebihannya, apa saja kerugian yang perlu kita ganti dengan sebaik-baiknya. Dan tidak benar juga kita sebagai orang yang skeptis atau ilmuwan memberitahu politik apa yang harus mereka lakukan. Mereka harus membuat keputusan, dan kami disebut sebagai sesi bahwa di sesi pertama bahwa kami perlu memastikan bahwa kami memberikan informasi rasional yang baik, dan kemudian menjelaskan kepada para politisi, kemudian membuat keputusan berdasarkan itu, dan secara umum bukan untuk menunjukkan bahwa tidak ada alternatif. Tugas kita adalah untuk menginformasikan tentang pengetahuan yang dapat dikatakan atau apa itu fakta yang tidak. Gerakan hijau dalam hal-hal yang menurut saya dapat kita sebagai orang skeptis. Kami menginginkan lingkungan yang utuh dan layak huni, tetapi apakah kami berada di jalur yang benar? Apakah kami dihalangi oleh kepercayaan populer yang tidak berdasarkan, dan kita akan menjadi bagian dari sesi ini. Mempengaruhi keputusan politik pada energi dan iklim, dan juga pada pertanian. Dan kita memiliki 2 sesi hari ini, sebenarnya 2 subsesi yang akan kita bahas. Pertama dengan Lida dan Maltes berbicara tentang energi dan tenaga nuklir, dan kami akan datang ke sesi kedua setelah itu. Kemudian kami akan istirahat. Tidak akan pembicaraan, dan setelah setiap pembicaraan kami akan istirahat. Setelah itu kemudian kami akan bicara tentang pertanian dan stimulus, dan kami akan mengadakan diskusi panel di mana Anda akan memiliki banyak waktu untuk mengajukan pertanyaan kepada semua pembicara. Dan untuk memulai sekarang, izinkan saya menghubungi Lida untuk memberi ceramah. Dia cukup terkenal di kalangan ibu di bidang nuklir, telah terlibat dalam banyak kelompok ekomodernis termasuk ekomodernis Jerman dan China, dan dia akan bicara tentang energi dan dekarbonisasi. Jadi saya serahkan pada Lida.
Should I keep the microphone? So I would like to say thanks so much to Amadeo and for the Skeptics Congress for inviting me to speak here today.
Berbicara di sini hari ini.
I'm here today talking about the more specific title of my talk is critical thinking, because we want to be taking green energy goals seriously.
Energi hijau dengan serius.
So first I'd like to just say a few words about myself. Amadeo told you that I'm an ecomodernist. I'm a biologist. I'm a mother. I'm an environmentalist. And I'm many other things, just like we all are. I'm an avid hiker, and I'm a nature lover, and I love sci-fi and Star Trek and sausage dogs.
Jadi
and the reason why
dan alasan
it's also
mengapa
important to
juga
have an idea
penting
about
untuk
who
mengerti
is
siapa yang
speaking here today
berbicara di sini
is
hari
that
ini
often when we
adalah
talk about
karena
these topics,
seringnya
both
kita
on
berbicara
healthcare
tentang
as well
topik
as
ini,
environmental
baik
topics,
tentang perawatan
is
kesehatan
that
maupun topik
people
lingkungan,
often
bahwa orang sering
they are not
tidak
as
tertarik
interested in
untuk
listening if they don't
mendengarkan,
know why we're
dan
talking
mereka
about
tidak
that.
tahu mengapa
They
kita
don't know
membicarakan.
what motivates us
Mereka tidak
and
tahu apa
what
yang
kind
memotivasi
of
kita
values we
dan
share.
nilai-nilai apa yang kita bagi,
Because as we spoke
karena
to earlier,
seperti yang kita
there's
bicarakan
this question
sebelumnya,
about
ada
skepticism
pertanyaan tentang
and
skeptisme
policy, that we
dan
should not tell
kebijakan
politics
bahwa
what
kita tidak
they should
boleh
do. We should inform them about
memberitahu
the
politik
effects
apa yang harus mereka lakukan.
of their
Kita harus
choices.
membawa karena
And
efek
it should be very clearly
dan
communicated
harus
that
dikomunikasikan
when
dengan
we talk
sangat
about
jelas
green
bahwa
skepticism, we talk about the value in green things,
kita
which is
berbicara
basically
nilai dalam hal
protecting the
hijau,
environment,
juga dasarnya melindungi lingkungan,
maintaining
memelihara
diverse
ekosistem
ecosystems around the
yang
world,
beragam di
that
seluruh dunia,
we
dan
assume
kita
this is our
anggap
premise, that
ini
those
adalah
things are
premis
something that we should
kami bahwa hal
protect.
ini adalah sesuatu yang harus kami
So,
lindungi.
actually
Jadi
this is sort of
sebenarnya
more
ini lebih
unsaid
tidak
when we talk
terucapkan
about
ketika
healthcare
kita
and
berbicara
alternative medicine
perawatan
more often,
sehat dan
because
pengobatan
there is
alternatif.
also the value that we want
Dan-
to protect human health. But it's not as often we don't actually feel the
Tidak
need to
sering
differentiate.
kita merasa tidak perlu memberikan yang
But
lain
this
itu.
is a
Namun ini
core
adalah
part of
bagian
why
inti dari
we want to
mengapa
look at green
kami ingin
topics
melihat
in a
topik
skeptical
hijau
way, because they
dan
are so important,
cara yang sempit karena sangat
because
penting,
it
karena
is vital to get environmental questions right. So
jadi
many people think that
begitu
often
banyak orang
skepticism,
pikir bahwa
as it was mentioned earlier,
skeptisisme
that we can be
seperti yang
perceived
disebut
as nerds
sebelumnya
and
bahwa kita
weirdos,
dapat dianggap sebagai
but also that we
pembuku dan
can come
orang,
across
tapi
as
juga bahwa
we're
kita
only
dapat
there to
menyeberang
pick apart well-meaning ideas or point out to people when they're wrong.
menunjukkan kepada
And as
orang ketika
Professor
mereka
Ernst
salah dan
very
sebagai
well said,
seorang
we
profesor
need
yang
to frame
sungguh-sungguh
the discussion
dengan
differently,
slide mengatakan bahwa
that
kita
we can only
menggunakan
be against
diskusi
quackery or sham treatments. We have to be for progressive healthcare. And this
dan
is a
mendukung
value. We
perawatan
are
kesehatan
for
progresif, dan ini
environmental
adalah nilai kita untuk
policies in
kebijakan
energy and agriculture.
lingkungan di bidang energi
So
dan
I think both
pertanian.
topics are
Jadi saya
important,
pikir
but I'm
kedua
here
topik
today to
itu
talk about
penting,
energy.
tetapi saya di sini
And
hari ini
particularly then, when we talk about these issues, we will come to that
ketika kita
uncomfortable
berbicara tentang masalah
situation
ini
that
kita sampai pada sesuatu yang tidak
sometimes
nyaman,
we have to do
sehingga
the skeptical
kadang-kadang
thing
kita
and
harus
point out
melakukan
where
hal
these
yang
ideas
skeptis dan
are
menunjukkan
not really well
iman ide
founded
ini
in
tidak
evidence.
sangat beralasan, dan
Because
karena
oftentimes we
seringkali
make
kita
quick
membuat keputusan berdasarkan
gut-based decisions and we
naluri
have
dengan
these
cepat, dan
intuitive
kita
perceptions about
berpersepsi
what is good for
intuitif
the
tentang
environment
apa yang
and what
baik
is natural
untuk lingkungan
and what
dan apa yang
can help us
alami dan apa yang
reach
dapat
these
membantu
goals.
kita mencapai
But
tujuan.
they're not
Tetapi
always correct.
tidak
It's not
selalu benar.
an
Ini
error-free
bukan
process.
proses bebas
We have
kesalahan.
this inborn
Kita
way
memiliki
of
cara
judging what is
bahwa
good and
untuk menilai
bad and
baik
what
dan
things
buruk
are risky and what are
dan hal
not.
apa yang berisiko dan
That have
tidak
developed
yang telah
under
berkembang
during a long
selama
evolution that have been very
evolusi
useful
yang
for us,
panjang
but
yang
in
sangat
our
berguna
environment that is
bagi
filled with
kehidupan
abstract information and complex
dengan
problems,
informasi
it can
abstrak
lead us astray.
dan masalah yang kompleks. Hal ini
So
dapat menyesatkan
we
kita.
have this
Jadi kami
process of
memiliki proses
if
ini
you look
dengan
at
mudah
risk
jika Anda
research,
melihat
listen to
peneliti
risk
risiko dan
researchers
mendengarkan
on how we make these judgments
tentang
as what's
bagaimana
good
kita
and
membuat
bad
penilaian
for health,
apa
for
yang baik
environment,
dan
what is risky. They
lingkungan
will
apa
tell
yang
you that
berisiko. Mari
people
kita
always tend to
beritahu bahwa
have this overarching
orang
theme
selalu
of
cenderung
inflating the feel of risk when it's something that's unfamiliar,
ketika itu sesuatu yang
when
tidak
it's something
biasa,
that's
ketika
outside
itu
of
adalah
our
sesuatu
control,
yang di
when
luar
it's something
kendali
that's
kita,
artificial.
ketika kita adalah sesuatu yang
So
dibuat-buat.
we
Jadi
easily find
kita
anything
dapat
that
dengan
ticks those
mudah
boxes
menemukan apapun
risky,
yang membuat
whereas
kata-kata
we
berisiko,
underestimate
sedangkan
risks that
kita
feel familiar, that
meremehkan
we can
resiko
control
yang
ourselves.
terasa akrab yang
So
mengendalikan diri kita
these kind of
sendiri.
influences affect all of us. We can try to be more aware of them,
Kita dapat
but they
mencoba
live
untuk
on in our culture.
menyadarinya,
They
tetapi
become
mereka tetap
reinforced
hidup dalam budaya
by what other
diperkuat
people and what culture
oleh
tells
apa yang
us.
orang lain dan budaya
So
katakan
this is
tidak.
how
Jadi
we end
inilah
up with lots of
bagaimana
ideas
kita
where
berakhir
we
dengan
might have
banyak
to come
ide
to
di
the
mana
uncomfortable
kita
situation that we,
mungkin harus
by
sampai
a
pada
session, that
sudut
we
tidak
notice that
nyaman
they are not all correct.
bahwa semuanya
So
tidak benar.
when we talk about
Jadi
energy, this is
kita
most striking
berbicara
then
tentang energi,
with
ini yang paling
our
mencolok
most
dibandingkan dengan bentuk energi
new and
itu yang paling
strange
baru
and
dan
unfamiliar
aneh
form of
dan
energy,
asing, yaitu
which is nuclear power.
tenaga nuklir.
We have a
Kami
more
memiliki
intuitive feeling
perasaan yang lebih intuitif
the familiar
terhadap
sources
sumber
forces of
kekuatan
energy that we use.
energi yang kami
We
gunakan.
can sense them with our
Kita dapat
senses. We
merasakannya
know
dengan indera
that wind
kita
can be
tahu bahwa
harnessed with
angin dapat
sails, that
dimainkan
flow of
dengan
water, you can feel it, you
dan
can change
mengalirkan
it.
air, dapat
We
merasakannya.
know
Anda dapat
we can
kita tahu
feel
bahwa
solar
bisa
effect of
merasakan
warming.
efek
We can
pemanasan
avoid
matahari.
these
Kita
risks
dapat
as well.
menghindari risiko ini
By going to the
dengan
shade,
pergi
we
ke tempat teduh,
know
dan
that
kita mengetahui
by burning
dengan
stuff we get
membakar
energy,
barang kami
and we
mendapat
also get the
energi, dan
drawbacks of
kami
say
juga
smoke.
kekurangan
But
dari
we know how
pengaruh
that is
asap,
done. You
tetapi
go away
kami
from the
tahu
smoke,
bagaimana
you
itu
avoid it.
ditangani.
It's not scary to us.
Ini
We
tidak
do know
menakutkan bagi
rationally
kami.
that it
Kami tahu
causes
secara rasional
risk.
bahwa ini
It
menyebabkan
has
risiko
an
yang
effect on our health,
berdampak
but it's
pada
not
kesehatan kami, tetapi
an
ini
alarm
bukan
bell that
bel
goes off in our
alarm yang
heads.
berbunyi di
Really,
kepala
that is something
kita.
you should
Itu
avoid.
adalah sesuatu yang harus Anda
But
hindari
this
dan
happens
hindari.
a lot
Tapi
with
ini
nuclear
sering
power.
terjadi pada tenaga
Because we
nuklir
don't
karena
have senses
kita
for
tidak
it.
punya akal
Because we
sehat
don't
untuk itu,
have,
karena kita tidak
we can't control it.
bisa mengendalikannya.
The only very trained
Satu-satunya
nuclear engineers who have
insinyur
the
nuklir
practical
sangat
know-how how to
terlatih yang
control
memiliki
nuclear reactor.
pengetahuan praktis bagaimana
So,
Anda mengendalikan reaksi nuklir.
It
Jadi
will always have this
posisi
position of
ini
being
akan selalu menjadi
target
sasaran ketakutan
inordinate fear.
yang berlebihan.
So if you listen to risk
Jika Anda
researchers,
mendengarkan peneliti
I will quote
saya akan
Peter Salmon, for instance,
mengutip Peter
saying
Salmon misalnya
the risks that
mengatakan
upset us
risiko yang mengganggu
and
kita
the risks
dan
that kill us
risiko yang membunuh
are
kita
two
adalah
completely
dua
different
hal yang
things.
sama sekali berbeda.
Because as you see here,
Karena
so in this
seperti
graph,
yang Anda lihat di
you
sini,
have here amount of fatalities, human fatalities
cuma
per unit of
jumlah
energy
kematian
produced.
kematian
And this
manusia
is
per unit
these statistics is not a
ini adalah
controversial
bukanlah
question. Actually,
pertanyaan
you find them in
kontroversial.
published literature. You find them on
Di
statistic sources
Anda
like
menemukan di
Statista,
sumber strategi
in
seperti
EU
statistika
projects
dalam
where
proyek UI,
they take into
di mana
account
mereka
energy
memperhitungkan
externalities.
eksternalitas energi.
So
Jadi
we
kami
fear
paling takut
nuclear power
pada
most of
tenaga
all,
nuklir, sedangkan batu bara
whereas coal
menyebabkan
causes an inordinate amount of the actual deaths.
jumlah
We
kematian
know
yang
that
sangat
coal
buruk.
is
Kami
bad,
tahu bahwa batu bara
we're
itu
not
buruk,
exactly
tetapi kami
afraid of it.
tidak terlalu
We
takut
just want to
tentang
get rid
itu.
of it
Kami
because
hanya
it's
ingin menyingkirkan
unpopular. It's not
karena
that
tidak
it causes
populer, bukan
anxiety
karena hal itu sebagian
the
besar
most part,
membuat
unless
kita
we're
cemas,
talking about
kecuali jika
climate
kita
anxiety.
kecemasan
But
iklim.
This is the
Tapi
kind of
inilah
situation we're
situasi
in.
yang kita
So,
hadapi.
I want to
Jadi
talk
saya
about
ingin berbicara tentang
what kind of requirements we
persyaratan
should
apa yang
pose for
harus kita
green energy,
ajukan
what
untuk
kind of things we
energi,
need from
hal-hal
energy
apa yang
in order
kita
to
butuhkan
reach
dari
environmental
energi
goals.
untuk mencapai
But
tujuan
often this
lingkungan,
discussion
tetapi
is hampered by the fact
seringkali
that
diskusi ini
this
terhadapkan
kind of
oleh
risk
fakta bahwa
perception
persepsi resiko
skewed risk
semacam ini,
perception
persepsi
to
yang
start
resiko
with
yang miring
stops
untuk
us from
memulai dan
having
menghentikan kita
a
dari
level-headed
diskusi
discussion,
berkepala dingin,
trying to look at the
mencoba
actual
untuk
evidence
melihat
and
bukti
comparing
nyata
things,
dan membandingkan
because we
berbagai
have
hal karena kita memiliki
a very
rasa
inflated sense
risikonya
of
yang
risk in nuclear
sangat
power.
tinggi terhadap
So let's look
tenaga
at
nuklir.
few of the most common
Jadi mari kita
points
lihat beberapa poin penting
where risk perception and actual knowledge are very
pengetahuan
far
aktual
apart.
sangat berjauhan.
So the most common must be
Sehingga
that
yang paling umum
nuclear
adalah
power
bahwa
is,
tenaga nuklir memiliki
has
resiko
risks that are beyond consideration
yang tidak dapat
because of the
dipertimbangkan
long-lived,
karena
incredibly dangerous nuclear waste.
limbah nuklir yang sangat
This
bahaya
used to
dan
be my
membunuhnya.
reason for being against
Ini
nuclear
dulu
power.
adalah
Actually,
alasan
I
yang
thought that
menentangnya.
having this
Sebenarnya saya
hanging
pikir
risk
memiliki resiko gantung
on
ini
the
pada
necks of generations to come
generasi
was
mendatang
just
hanyalah
such a heavy reason that we should
alasan yang sangat
reject
berat
nuclear
sehingga
power,
kita harus
period. There
menolak
was no
periode
justification of
tenaga
producing
nuklir.
any amount of energy since it was so incredibly dangerous for generations to come.
Bagi generasi yang akan datang.
But then,
Tetapi
as I
kemudian,
stopped to reflect
ketika saya berhenti
these ideas and I
untuk
spelled them out loud
merefleksikan
for
ide ini,
myself,
saya
it
mengajarkan
was
dengan
really
keras
quite
untuk
striking
ini. Saya
because
sangat
the
membingungkan
thinking was
karena
this:
pemikirannya adalah nuklir ini saya
nuclear, I
hanya
just know that nuclear waste is
bahwa limbah
bad,
nuklir itu
really
buruk,
bad.
sangat buruk.
I don't actually need
Saya
to go and
sebenarnya
check
tidak perlu pergi
the data.
dan memeriksa data
How bad,
seberapa
to what
buruk,
degree, how.
sampai seberapa
I just
jauh.
know already.
Saya baru
It's
tahu
logical to
bahwa
reject it because
logis
of this
untuk menolak
knowledge.
karena pengetahuan
But
terlebih.
I'm sure you know,
Saya yakin
and I know
Anda
from
tahu
personal
dan
experience
saya
that
tahu
just
pengalamanku
knowing
bahwa
is
hanya
a really
mengetahui
risky
adalah posisi
position
yang
to
sangat
take if we want to
beresiko untuk
understand
diambil
something
jika
properly.
kita ingin
So
memasuki
let's look a
dengan
little
benar.
bit about
Jadi
what we
mari
actually
kita
know
lihat tentang apa
about
kita
nuclear
sebenarnya
waste.
tahu tentang limbah nuklir.
So in this
Jadi
chart,
Anda
you have
dalam bagian ini
radioactivity measured in relative activity.
diukur dengan
It's
aktivitas relatif itu
your typical kind of waste from a light water reactor.
reaksi air dengan
a very common type of
adalah
reactor,
jenis
and,
reaktor yang sangat umum
At
dan
the baseline, at
pada
level of
baseline
1, we have
pada
natural
tingkat 1
uranium.
kita memiliki
So
uranium.
here you see that
Jadi di
at
sini
first the spent nuclear fuel
Anda melihat bahwa
will
pada
be
awalnya
very
bahan
highly
bakar
active.
nuklir bekas dan sangat aktif
and
dan
then you see that quite
kemudian Anda
relatively quickly
melihatnya dengan
the
relatif
activity goes
cepat.
down, because when you have something that's highly active,
Ada
it means that it will send out lots of radiation, there will be lots of decays, and quite soon you will have, all the elements will have turned into other radioactive elements. And then, after about 1,000 years,
kita
which
telah
is the
berubah jadi
blue vertical line
ribuan
there,
tahun yang
you have material that is very
Anda memiliki
comparable
bahan yang sangat
in its
sebanding dalam
radioactivity to naturally
radioaktivitasnya
rain.
dengan hujan alami.
Now,
Sekarang,
at that point, for
pada
it
titik
to
ini, untuk
cause
menyebabkan
considerable
kerusakan
harm to us,
yang
we
cukup
would
besar bagi
actually have
kita,
to ingest
sebenarnya
it
harus
directly.
melaluinya secara langsung.
And this,
Dan-
the same level of activity
Dan
we
tingkat
see in natural
aktivitas yang
uranium,
sama ini kita
which is
lihat
sprinkled
uranium
around the
alami yang
bedrock
tersebar di
all
sekitar
over the
batuan
world.
dasar
There
di
are
seluruh
hotspots
dunia.
and there are
Ada
spots
titik
with
panas dan
less.
ada titik dengan
It's also present in
lebih sedikit
seawater, leaching out
air
all the
laut
time
dengan
uranium from the
mengalir
bedrock. But
sebanyak
we
waktu.
don't really fear this
Tapi
natural
kami tidak
uranium.
terlalu takut akan hujan
Because it's
alami
natural.
karena itu alami.
The difference in
Bahwa
radiation
perbedaan
is not
radiasi
the question here.
bukanlah pertanyaan.
At that point,
Di
at
sini,
hundreds of
pada
thousands
saat
of
itu,
years, which we
ratusan ribu
consider
tahun,
nuclear waste to be so
yang kami
incredibly
anggap limbah
dangerous,
nuklir
it's not dangerous because it's like natural uranium.
itu
It's
tidak
dangerous
berbahaya
because of
karena
the step that we see that it went through power plants. It became artificial. So it's a perception. It's not actually as dangerous as we perceive it to be. And this kind of practical considerations of
praktis
how it
macam
could
ini
actually
tentang
cause us
bagaimana
harm,
sebenarnya bisa
you don't actually
menyebabkan Anda
see
tidak benar-benar
detailed
melihat
suggestions.
secara
People who talk about
mengetahui
nuclear waste being
orang-orang
too
yang
dangerous for us to consider
tentang
nuclear.
limbah yang selalu berbahaya
They don't
bagi
have
kita
to
untuk
tell
mengungkapnya.
or lay
Mereka tidak
forward or
perlu
make
memberitahu
reports
atau
about
mengungkapkan
practically how
atau
this
membuat
harm will be
laporan tentang
conveyed to
secara
us.
praktis bagaimana
It's enough
bahaya
to
ini
insinuate that
disampaikan
since it
cukup
stays
untuk
radioactive
menjadi
for a
bahwa
long time, the harm could surely
bahayanya
somehow
pasti
be
tersampaikan dan
conveyed.
ini sedikit merims
And this is a little bit similar, as many of us know from fear of
diketahui
chemicals.
bahwa
We know
banyak
that
orang
if you
karena
tell a
takut
person
akan
that there are
benci
synthetic chemicals,
kucing
that in some
seorang
dose
bahwa
can
Anda
cause
benci
harm, and if they hear that it can be detected, it's very
seperti
difficult
deteksi
to
sangat sulit
remove that
untuk
feeling of
menghilangkan
fear
rasa
and
takut dan
risk
risiko
in normal
itu
people's
dalam
minds when they hear
pikiran
this.
orang normal
You
ketika
have to
mereka
actually do
Anda
lots
harus
of
benar
after
melakukan
processing to think
banyak
that
hal setelah
no,
pemeriksaan untuk berpikir
that's
bahwa
we need a dose
kita membutuhkan
that will make it
dosis
poison.
yang akan
And this is
membuatnya
exactly
menjadi
the same
racun dan
situation
ini
with radiation.
situasi yang persis
Yes,
sama
it
ucapkan
will
dia
remain radioactive for hundreds of
akan
thousands of
tetap
years, and we can
radioaktif selama
detect that,
ratus
we
ribu
can
tahun
measure it
dan kita
directly.
mendeteksi
But
bahwa
that
kita
alone
dapat
is not
mengukurnya
enough to
secara
cause
langsung.
harm. We
Tapi
actually
itu
have to
sudah
have
tidak
a
cukup untuk
considerable dose somehow
menyebabkan
delivered to people for it to harm us. So, the lack of
jadi
suggestions as how
kurangnya
this
saran
harm
adalah
will come
bagaimana bahaya
is striking
ini
if you
akan
actually
datang
look.
sangat
Many people
mencolok
don't
jika Anda
look
benar-benar
because it's enough to
melihatnya.
just
Banyak orang
assume.
tidak melihat karena
But
itu
in
cukup.
Finland, in my home country,
Tapi
you actually
di
have
negara
a
asal
geological
saya, Anda
repository
sebenarnya memiliki
for
gudang geologi untuk
long-term
menyimpan
storage
jangka
of nuclear
panjang
waste,
limbah
and
nuklir
they have
dan mereka
done
telah
externally reviewed
melakukan
studies,
studi
the best
yang
kind of studies there are,
ditinjau
about
secara
what will happen
eksternal,
with waste
jenis
storage,
studi yang
what
terbaik
kind of worst case
tentang apa yang
scenarios
terjadi dengan
we
penyimpanan
can
limbah
conceive.
skenario terburuk yang dapat kita bayangkan.
And what they have found is
Dan
that
apa yang mereka
if
temukan
we assume
bahwa jika
that there
kita
will be
berasumsi
something
bahwa
fundamentally
akan
wrong
ada
with the
sesuatu yang secara
cast that
fundamental
contain the
salah
waste,
dan padanya
again, this
kasih
is
yang
not seem
limbah
likely, but if we assume that, and if we assume that nuclear waste
Berasumsi
begins
bahwa
to leak, we assume that people have forgotten
berasumsi bahwa
everything about the waste
mulai
storage
bocor,
site,
kami
there's
berasumsi
no
bahwa
caution
orang-orang
about
telah
it, no
melakukan segalanya
monitoring of
tentang
any kind.
tempat yang penyimpanan
We have
limbah.
people living on top, we have them drinking the groundwater which is flushed through the bedrock, and farming food on the spot. The worst possible exposure
Kemungkinan
that they
pemaparan
can
terburuk yang
calculate for
dapat
those people
mereka
would
hitung
be
bagi orang itu
on the
adalah
magnitude of
sebesar
eating 2
makan
extra
2
bananas per year.
ekstra per tahun.
So this is why
Jadi
I
ini yang
sometimes say
mengapa
that
saya
nuclear
terkadang
waste
mengatakan
discussion
bahwa
is quite
diskusi
literally
limbah
bananas.
secara happy adalah pisang.
Because bananas
Karena
are
pisang
radioactive,
sangat
very
sedikit
slightly. They have radioactive
mengandung
potassium in them, but you get a small
tapi
extra
Anda
dose
mendapat
from
sedikit
eating a
dosis
banana.
tambahan dari makanan
It's
pisang.
not dangerous, don't
Tidak
stop eating
berbahaya
bananas.
dan jangan berhenti makan pisang.
So,
Jadi
there's a lot of fear,
ada banyak
but
ketakutan.
when we try to look at
Tetapi
it
ketika
realistically,
kami melihatnya
we
secara
find that
realistis,
it's
kami
that
menemukan
kind of harm
bahwa
is very
bahaya
difficult
semacam
to
itu
come by.
sangat sulit didapat.
So, we as
Jadi, kami
skeptics,
sebagai
what I'd
skeptis,
love
saya ingin
skeptics to help
membantu
people
orang-orang
with
skeptis
is risk perception
adalah
and
persepsi
considering
risiko
the
dan
risk landscape.
mempertimbangkan lanskap
Because
risiko,
another thing we
karena
learn
hal
from
yang
risk
kami
researchers
pelajari
is
dari
that
peneliti risiko
people
adalah bahwa
completely tend
orang-orang
to
benar-benar
forget
cenderung lupa
to weigh the
untuk
risks of the alternatives.
mempertimbangkan resiko dari
Not
alternatif.
only that there's an
Tidak hanya
important
ada
risk-benefit
rasio
ratio
manfaat
to be made
resiko
in each
penting yang
for
harus
each
dibuat
separately,
di
but that
masing-masing untuk masing-masing
people feel
sisi.
somehow
Tapi
that if
orang-orang merasa
they
entah
feel
bagaimana
there's
jika mereka
this
merasa
large
risiko
risk for
besar
nuclear
untuk
and we
nuklir
just
dan
choose
kami
to
hanya
avoid that,
memilih untuk
we
menghindari
can breathe
bahwa
out in relief.
kami dapat
We
bernafas
have
lega.
avoided
Kita harus
risks. We
menghindari
have
risiko. Kita
a sort of a zero
memiliki
risk
semacam
choice.
pilihan tanpa
And this is
risiko dan
never
ini
true.
tidak
There's
pernah
never
benar
something
dan
that
bahwa
is zero
tidak
risk.
pernah ada sesuatu
So
yang
we
tidak
really
berisiko.
need to
Jadi
make sure that
kami
people
perlu
learn to look at the
memastikan bahwa
risk
orang belajar
landscape.
melihat
Risks
lanskap
all the
risiko,
alternatives.
resiko semua alternatif.
So many people think that it's
Jadi
even
banyak
petty
orang
to start
pikir bahwa
comparing waste, but
membandingkan
this is a
limbah
really
bahkan
important
kecil
thing to
sekali.
teach people about risk. That
Mengajar orang tentang
we
risiko
have
yang
to
harus
compare
kita
and weigh.
bandingkan dan timbang.
Because it's
Karena
really striking when you
sangat menunjukkan
start
ketika
looking
Anda
at
mulai melihat
the fact that
fakta
other energy forms,
bahwa
those we're
bentuk
not
energi
supposed
lain
to compare
mereka
because
yang
they're
tidak
not as
seharusnya
dangerous,
membandingkan karena
can be
mereka
order
tidak
or
sebenarnya
magnitude larger.
bisa menjadi urutan
They
atau
cause vastly more
mereka
health
menyebabkan
problems.
lebih banyak masalah kesehatan.
They actually stay
Mereka
harmful
benar-benar
forever,
tetap
which is the
berbahaya
case for
selamanya
many
dan
heavy
merupakan
metals. They
kasus
will,
banyak logam beratnya.
for the end of the
Mereka
universe,
untuk akhir alam
they will
semesta.
potentially stay exactly as harmful. And we have many industries that don't have any responsibility for taking care of the waste. They will end up in landfills somewhere and leak into the ground, or go up in smoke into the sky. And in this case,
dalam hal ini,
coal
batu bara
even
bahkan
causes more radioactive
menyebabkan lebih banyak
contamination than
kontaminasi
nuclear
radioaktif daripada
because
nuklir
you
karena
concentrate
Anda memusatkan
radioactive trace
jejak
elements in
radioaktif
coal
dalam
ash and you
abu
spread
batu
them
bara dan Anda
into the
menyebarkan ke
environment.
lingkungan.
But this is not
sebenarnya
really, this is
ini
not as
tidak
scary simply.
seseram itu.
So,
Jadi
it's really time to
inilah
try to
saatnya
make
untuk
these
mencoba
comparisons from an accurate evidence-based level. And here, it's really surprising to many, but it's worth taking this moment of changing the perspectives. What about thinking about
bagaimana
what kind
dengan
of benefits there are to nuclear waste?
memikirkan manfaat
Because
apa
you
saja
have
pada
several.
limbah nuklir karena
It's
Anda
tiny,
punya beberapa
it's
sangat
fully
kecil.
accounted for. Very rare to find an industry that fully accounts for the whole future of its wastes. We can actually
Kami sebenarnya
recycle or
dapat mendaur ulang
reuse
dan
nuclear
menggunakan kembali
waste.
limbah
We
nuklir.
have
Kami
existing
memiliki
reactors
reaktor
today that are
yang
using
saat itu
spent nuclear fuel in your reactors and
nuklir
producing
di
more
reaktor.
low carbon energy from that same waste and reducing it again by many times. Nuclear waste is also solid and easy to store. And as I said, we don't need to do anything,
kita tidak dapat perlu
but
melakukan
simply the
apapun,
passage
tapi
of
hanya
time
perlu
will make it less
berlalunya
harmful.
waktu secara pasif akan
Okay.
mengurangi bahaya. Jadi,
So, let's move on to
mari
the
kita
next
lanjutkan ke
point where
poin
there's
berikutnya,
lots of
di mana
gaps in risk.
ada banyak celah dan pergelangan.
So,
Jadi,
I'm talking about
saya berbicara
energy
tentang
accidents, and I'd love to
kecelakaan
ask
energi dan
here
saya ingin bertanya
from
di
people in
sini
the audience,
dari hadirin
how many of you,
berapa
many of you
banyak
can
Anda
name
yang
some
dapat
of the largest
menyebabkan berapa
nuclear energy
kecelakaan
accidents?
energi nuklir terbesar?
Chernobyl? Fukushima, 3 Mile?
Fukushima.
How many of you knew
Berapa
Chernobyl?
banyak dari Anda mengenal Chernobyl?
Fukushima?
Fukushima?
Yeah.
Ya.
Next, I'd like to ask,
Selanjutnya, saya ingin
could you
bertanya,
name some of the
dapatkah Anda
deadliest
menyebutkan
accidents
beberapa
from other
kecelakaan
energy
paling mematikan dari
sources?
sumber energi lain?
A dam. Very good.
Sangat bagus.
Bayonne Dam. Right?
Bendungan Ban
How many of you knew about the
Berapa
Bankiayo
banyak
Dam?
dari kalian yang tahu tentang bendungan Bankyo?
What about the Bayonne Dam?
Bagaimana dengan Payon Dam?
Yeah, so
Ya,
here's a bit
ini
like the
agak mirip
situation
dengan
with cars
situasi mobil
versus flying.
versus terbang
We know that
versus
cars cause way
pesawat.
more
Kami tahu bahwa
deaths,
mobil menyebabkan lebih banyak
but
kematian,
we're not
tetapi
really afraid of
kami
driving.
tidak benar-benar
But
takut untuk
when
mengemudi.
a plane
Tetapi
crashes,
kita sebuah
everybody
pesawat
notices,
jatuh,
and
semua
many
orang
people are really
memperhatikan
afraid.
dan banyak orang sangat takut.
And
Dan
flying is also
juga
a more unnatural form of
merupakan bentuk
travel, and
perjalanan
we don't have the same
yang
kind of
lebih
control
tidak wajar dan
as
kami
we do
tidak
with our cars.
memiliki jenis
So,
kontrol atas
the most famous
Jadi,
nuclear energy accidents, Chernobyl, I'll just recap
kecelakaan
quickly
energi
for
paling
the
terkenal yang akan
for
saya
the
rekap
context, because
dengan
many
cepat
people,
untuk
although they
konteksnya,
can name
karena banyak
Chernobyl,
orang yang meskipun mereka
they
dapat
don't
Chernobyl,
necessarily know
mereka
how
belum
many
tentu
people
tahu
were killed.
berapa banyak orang yang
So
terbunuh.
UN has
Jadi,
had
PBB
almost 10 different
memiliki
bodies
hampir 10
looking into making reports on the effects of Chernobyl, involving 3 governments, Red Cross, and lots of independent scientists, so this is quite well known. Out of the 120 emergency workers putting out the Chernobyl fires, 30 of them, about 30, died from acute radiation sickness. And then we have the immediate release of iodine in the first weeks after the accident. The surrounding population was not really even informed about the accident. They were not protected. They were not taking iodine tablets. And this led to that this iodine concentrated in the thyroids of young people, and this led to several thousand thyroid deaths in the decades that came. And thyroid can be pretty well treated, but we have had so far 15 deaths from these thyroid cancers. So these are the confirmed science-based death counts. There are estimates that with more thyroid cancers toward the end of the lifetime of this cohort, we could be looking at 160 deaths all in all. So let's say that roughly we're looking at somewhere around 200 deaths. Now, you can probably imagine that there have been energy accidents with more than 200 deaths, as we've heard here earlier. So, here, the first place, tragically, is for the Bangkeo Dam. It was in 1975 in China, and 100,000 deaths is a conservative estimate of those who directly drowned. I just didn't want to make it any bigger because you couldn't see anything of the rest. 250 is another estimate of people who died of the famine and epidemics that followed. It was a really horrible, tragic accident that was also kept in the dark largely for several decades. Terrible story. But we also have coal power here next in the London smog in the 50s, where suddenly you had air pollution pooling over London and thousands of people died, even more thousands, tens of thousands got injured and asthma, other symptoms afterwards. Then you have 2 more dams. You have a dam in India and a dam in Italy in the 60s and 70s. And then you find 2 really tragic mine accidents from the earlier half of the 20th century, the Beng Sihu and Couriers in France and China. But then you come back to the more modern day. There's UFA explosion and San Juanico and Guadalajara are all gas explosions in the 80s and 90s. They all killed more people directly, several hundred people, and injured thousands. Many of these don't have injury counts. They will only give you information about deaths. But then you have the Soma mine accident, a fire in a mine in Turkey in 2014. 300 people died immediately. Now, who of you have heard of Soma mine fire? So these are accidents that are more recent and more deadly by far than the Chernobyl accident, and most of us are not aware of them. I didn't know more than 2 of them until very recently when I started looking into it. So here clearly there's a difficulty in how risk perception makes it seem so much more dangerous because we know one type of accidents but don't know about all of the others. But then you'll say, what about the environmental effects? Many people fear nuclear because they think of the horrible wastelands that we leave after. That Chernobyl, you can't live in the 30-kilometer area around it. So here, there's also research on what happened actually as a result of the evacuation. And you know that there are people who lived in the rural areas here in Chernobyl. And when they were evacuated to larger cities, they were actually, the result was health harm from air pollution in a larger city. They would have been better off had they been allowed to stay in their homes. There's now, as a result of them moving out, nature has taken over, and there are more than 400 species of vertebrates living in the area, thriving populations of these. So it's clearly a very different picture from what we have absorbed culturally. I at least thought it was barren, ghost-like wasteland. So these kind of risk perceptions really take us astray when we are looking at what kind of choices we should do with our energy policies. So Fukushima, the more recent accident, actually released so little radiation all in all,
radiasi yang sangat
that there are
sedikit
no
sehingga
health or
tidak ada
environmental
efek
effects
kesehatan
expected
dan
from it.
lingkungan yang diharapkan
Based on
dari
the best
berdasarkan
possible
ilmu
science that we have,
pengetahuan yang terbaik yang
it's
kita
simply too
miliki
low.
ini terlalu rendah.
But the hasty
Tetapi
reaction to it, the
reaksi
fear and the
tergesa-gesa terhadap
evacuation already
ketakuan
killed
dan
1,600
apakah
or
melewaskan
2,000, depending on how
1.600
you
dan
calculate.
2.000 tergantung
And the
pada
reaction in Germany
bagaimana
alone
Anda menghitung dari
on closing down
di
nuclear
Jerman
plants
sendiri dengan
has so
solusi
far, between now and Fukushima,
dan
caused
Fukushima menelan
4,600 deaths. There
korban
was just a paper out
4.600 kematian hanya
about
ada
this
sebuah
in the past month.
makalah
And the
dalam
rest of Europe is on track.
sebulan terakhir.
If they will continue reducing nuclear, they're on track with increasing deaths by 100,000. Because air pollution is
Karena
just so much
polusi udara
deadlier,
jauh
and
lebih
there
mematikan dan
have been no
belum ada solusi yang
good
baik
solutions to
untuk
replacing
menggantikan
nuclear with
nuklir
clean energy.
dengan energi bersih.
So we need to
Jadi
define
kita perlu
green
mendefinisikan
goals
tujuan
for energy.
hidup
We
untuk
can't rely on
energi.
risk,
Kita tidak
on
bisa
this fear.
mengandalkan
We
risiko pada
have to
ketakutan.
have these
Kita harus
discussions about waste
berdiskusi
and
tentang
accidents
pemborosan dan
to try to
kecelakaan
get to a
untuk
place
mencoba
where we can
mencapai
look at the
sesuatu
evidence
yang
and see
tepat di mana kita
what
dapat
kind of choices
melihat
have what kind of
bukti, melihat
effects,
pilihan
instead
seperti
of
apa yang
ruling
seperti
something out
apa efeknya
to begin
daripada
with as too
memutuskan
scary.
keluar untuk mulai.
So this is the situation
Jadi
we're
ini
in.
adalah sesuatu di mana
Our carbon emissions are only
emisi
rising.
karbon kita
We need
hanya
to get
meningkat, kita
down
perlu
quickly.
segera turun. Jadi kita
If
melihat
we look at expert scientific organizations like IPCC or International Energy
atau
Agency,
Badan Energi
they will
Internasional,
actually tell you in many
mereka
different
benar-benar
ways
akan
and in
memberitahu
very
Anda
long
dengan
reports and
berbagai
so on
cara dalam laporan
that
yang
we
sangat
really need every
panjang.
possible
Oleh
method
karena
at our
kami
disposal,
membutuhkan
and then some. They are
dan kemudian
relying
mereka
on
mengandalkan
techniques that have not been developed yet. Carbon capture and storage on large scale in 2030, getting us to negative emissions
yang
by
belum kami
2070.
yakini pada tahun
It's a
2070.
gargantuan effort. So clearly,
Ini adalah
emissions,
upaya yang
being
besar.
low in
Jadi
emissions, is
jelas
an important requirement for clean energy. Here you have
di sini Anda
solar,
memiliki
hydro,
tenaga
wind, and
surya
nuclear being the
hydro,
lowest,
Anda ingin dan nuklir
wind and nuclear
menjadi
being
yang
best.
terendah, dalam nuklir menjadi yang terbaik. Tetapi
But you also can't forget
Anda tidak
pollution and
bisa
health. It's not
melupakan
very green
polusi
if
dan
lots of people die.
kesehatan.
And here is the same information
Ini tidak
as
terlalu-
in the graph I showed you before. But basically we have the safest are solar, wind, hydro, and nuclear, which have very comparable health statistics. And then the third aspect is something that is overlooked way too
Aspek
often.
ketiga adalah sesuatu yang
And
terlalu
it's
sering
land
diabaikan
use.
dengan penggunaan lahannya.
Why?
Mengapa?
Because land use
Karena
is
penggunaan
literally
lahan secara harfiah
question of
adalah
protecting
masalah
wildlife
yang melihat
habitats.
habitat satwa liar.
Ask any
Tanya ahli
conservation
biologi
biologist,
konservasi manapun,
we won't
kami
have
tidak akan
thriving
memiliki
ecosystems without
ekosistem yang berkembang
space
tanpa
for them to live
ruang
in.
bagi mereka untuk
The
hidup.
UN
Dalam laporan
Biodiversity and Ecosystems
Karena
report that came out
Hayati
this
dan
spring
ekosistem PBB
highlighted the number one threat
yang keluar musim
to
semi ini yaitu
biodiversity
ancaman
globally
nomor
is
satu
changes
karena
in land and sea use.
perubahan dalam penggunaan
This
darat
is
dan laut.
huge.
Ini sangat besar.
If we use
Jika
a
kita
lion's share
menggunakan
of the
bagian
natural
terbesar
habitats
dari
left,
habitat alami
we
yang
won't
tersisa,
have
kami
any
tidak
more
akan memiliki
lions.
singa lagi.
This is really
Ini
the practical
benar-benar
issue.
masalah
We can
praktis.
get
Kita bisa
climate change even,
mendapatkan perubahan iklim
let's say
yang
we
bahkan
somehow get climate change completely
katakanlah kita bagaimana membuat perubahan iklim
under
sepenuhnya
control.
terkendali. Tapi
But we've used up
kita telah
all
menggunakan
habitats.
semua
It's
habitat,
just a
tapi itu
practical thing.
hanya
We
hal
need to have
praktis
land
yang kita
over.
butuhkan untuk memiliki
So
daratan.
this gets overlooked too
Jadi ini
often.
terlalu
And
sering
one way to look at
diabaikan
it
dan
is
salah
power
satu cara
density,
untuk melihatnya
shown
adalah
here in the table. So basically how much electricity you can produce per land area. And you can
dan
see the
Anda
reason
dapat
why
melihat alasan mengapa
fossil fuels have
bahwa
been
bakar
the
fosil menjadi sumber
source of choice
pilihan
for
yang
all
bagi semua
societies that they have developed, because they are
masyarakat
such a much
yang
more
mereka
easier
kembangkan
source of
karena
power.
mereka
You
adalah sumber
have
kekuatan yang
a
jauh
denser,
Anda memiliki
it's
yang
easier,
lebih
quicker,
mudah, lebih cepat,
cheaper to
lebih
get
murah
lots of
dan
energy out of
mendapatkan
that.
banyak
But clearly they
energi.
have these huge
Mereka
other
memiliki
drawbacks.
kelemahan besar lain.
But
Tetapi
nuclear power
kalau
doesn't
nuklir tidak.
suffer from these drawbacks. And while we really need all the tools at our disposal for the carbon emission goals, we also need to be careful about being as efficient as we can with both our land use and bringing emissions down. So it's not a question of let's choose only this one which we like and then exclude the others. Because there's also
Karena ada juga
a fourth
aspek keempat
aspect I'd like to
yang
add,
ingin saya tambahkan,
which is
yaitu
the practical success, the practical
keberhasilan
result.
praktis,
Where
hasil
can we
praktis,
see
di
that we
mana
have
kita dapat
actually
melihat bahwa kita
made this true? Where
memiliki
have we
benar-benar
decarbonized
di
societies?
mana kita telah
And here
dekarbonasi masyarakat, dan
we
di sini
really have
kita benar-benar
the best track record
memiliki
for
rekam
nuclear
jejak
and
terbaik
hydro.
untuk nuklir
If you
dan
look at
hydro.
Europe,
Jadi ke Anda
and the lowest
melihat
emission
emisi
electricity
listrik
produced
terbaik yang dihasilkan
is in
di
Norway,
Norwegia,
Sweden, France,
Prancis, Swiss,
Switzerland,
dan
and Finland.
Finlandia.
all those countries either use significant amounts of hydro, significant amounts of nuclear, or both. So you can't ignore these huge powerhouses of low carbon energy. And then there's the problem that we are not only looking at electricity, we actually have an even larger topic. In order to decarbonize the whole society, we also need to decarbonize heating and transport. We also need to see to it that we have access to clean drinking water in the future, and we can do that if we have plentiful clean energy by desalination. We need to help our industries, our heavy chemical industries and other industries, to become less resource intensive, to increase recycling, to free more natural habitats, less mining, less need for resources. But increased recycling also needs increased amounts of clean energy. We also want to lift people from poverty, and we want to be able to boost clean energy the most in order to get to these green goals. So, the question is really, what is the way we want to choose? So this is a graph from Staffan Quist, a Swedish nuclear engineer from the MIT who wrote a book together with Joshua Goldstein, a professor in international relations, on how some countries have solved climate change and others can follow. Basically, it shows you the data that you can find in many forms, in many places, and looking at emission reductions. Not only the Germany's path, which you can see in grey as the Energiewende, not only did it add air pollution deaths that could have been avoided, it also resulted in a situation where they haven't significantly reduced their carbon emissions. So is this something that we should take seriously? Is decarbonization a goal that is actually important to us? Do we want to protect human health? Do we want to protect wildlife habitats? Do we want to minimize land use? These are really important questions that we need to ask, and we need to try to look for the answers, looking on the evidence and not based on assumptions or risks that we imagine are there. Because we have seen countries like France and Sweden have used nuclear power to decarbonize their societies already in the 70s and 80s, and they have stayed on those low levels ever since. There are other places like Ontario and the European countries I mentioned earlier. So we should really get smart, we should listen to the scientific experts, and we should help people start evaluating these topics as a risk landscape, not as let's start by excluding something and then figure out how we can solve the rest. We need to give human health, environment, and the future of the planet the respect it deserves, and look at it from a skeptical point of view. So that's what I have to say. Thanks so much for listening.